Greetings, everyone. My name is Joshua Giorgio Rubin. I'm on the faculty of the Department of English, and I'd like to welcome you to IU South Bend, to the first year writing program, and to the English placement exam. For the next little while, my disembodied voice will be guiding you through the hows and the whys of the exam to help you do your very, very best. It's very important that you take this exam seriously. Quite frankly, I'm sure you don't want to have to take more classes than you really want to. So what we're going to do is we're going to look at a sample prompt. This is not the prompt that you're going to be given, but the format will be the same as this prompt. In fact, you'll be given two prompts to choose from. You can choose whichever one speaks to you the most, but don't try to do both of them. Nobody will be impressed by that. So choose one, go with it, and you can count on a format like this. So every prompt is going to have 4 parts. The first part of the prompt is going to be an introduction to an excerpt from an academic text. So in our example, we have, consider the following passage, defining literacy, adapted from the introduction to a college writing text by Sarah Garnes. So in this little introductory sentence here, you got some important information that you're going to want to keep track of for your essay that you're going to write. First of all, we've got the title of the passage. Since you're going to quote from the passage, you want to attribute your quotations to a particular source. Keep in mind you'll want to format the title as you see it formatted on the prompt itself. If the title is in quotation marks, as we have here, you'll want to use quotation marks. If the title is italicized, you'll want to italicize the title. Also, you'll want to note the name of the author, because not only will you want to say where your quotes are coming from, but you will want to say who is writing these quotes. So make sure that you keep track of that information too, and it's a good rule to think about the first time that you use an author's name to use the author's full name, but after that you can just use the author's last name, in this case Garnes. But don't refer to authors by their first names, as if Sarah here is your close chum. The second part is going to be an excerpt from an academic text. And this is really the heart of the exam. What you're going to be given is a pretty complicated little reading, and what we want to see is that you can make sense of it. So it's very important that you give this passage the reading it deserves. And as you are reading it, you want to look for key terms in the passage so that you can use them in your essay. Now, a key term is not what you might think it is. A key term is not necessarily just a big word that you don't know the meaning to. It might be, though. A key term is a word that really distills the ideas in the passage down to a single word or to a single phrase. Really, if you took these key terms away from the author, it would almost be as if they had nothing to talk about. So let's read through this passage right here, and let's look for the key terms. Here we go. Literacy refers to the ability to read and write, but it also refers to the ability to recognize, value, and use many different kinds of knowledge drawn from different areas of human experience. In a sense, each person has a chance to develop many literacies to use in different contexts, that is, at different times and in different places. That means that literacy should be broadly interpreted. In addition to knowing how to work with written texts, it also includes understanding the beliefs, practices, and traditions of any particular cultural group. For example, there is a literacy, or way of reading, the layout of physical space, and how it is used. If you want a quick experience of this extended sense of literacy, visit the service of a religious denomination that is not your own. You will probably notice some similarities with your own practices, but you will also notice that the regular members of the congregation are much more in tune or literate about what is happening in that space than you are. Literacy depends on context then. No matter what your age, you have already developed literacies for a great variety of communities and social situations. In the academic environment of the universities, you will need to develop many new literacies and strengthen some you already possess. And hey, did you notice there how I was so careful to read slowly and to read each word? That's exactly what you want to do too. So let's see what key terms we come up with. Literacy, of course, is the big key term, and many of the other key terms then come out of this idea of literacy: knowledge, human experience, context, culture, literacy, right? Context, community, social situations, literacy. So again, it's very, very important that you identify these key terms, because these key terms are what you're going to want to use in your own writing. So you can feel free to mark up the piece of paper that you've been given as much as you want. Circle things, write little notes, whatever, but make sure that you identify these key terms and that you keep them in the forefront of your mind as you write your essay. Now, the third part of the instructions are going to be the specific instructions. So you've had this passage, right? So now, what do you do with it? What you want to do is look for the verbs in the instructions. The verbs are going to tell you exactly what to do. So here we begin with: analyze and evaluate Garnes's ideas, organizing your essay around your analysis of her main points. So here we have first the verb analyze. That means break the passage down idea by idea and think about how all of the different parts work together. This analyze bit, this breaking down and putting back together, is very, very important. Now, I'm going to mention this again in a moment, but it's very important that you write this essay as if you were writing it for people who have no idea what you've just read and who know nothing about the topic that you're going to be writing about. In school situations, it's very, very easy to think, oh, well, I don't need to explain too much because the teacher's read that and the teacher knows where I'm coming from, so I don't need to explain it. But what we, as readers of the exam, want to see is that you can take complicated ideas, break them down, put them back together in such a way that you could just pull somebody off the street and say, hey, read this, and they would have a really good idea of what Garnes was talking about. So keep that in mind. Remember that you are writing for an audience who doesn't know what you're talking about. And that really comes into play when we talk about analyzing. The second verb here is evaluate. That means make a judgment call. Now, that doesn't mean saying Garnes doesn't know what she's talking about, or rah rah Garnes, she's just terrific. What making a judgment call in this situation means is taking the ideas that you're given and lining them up with the example that you're about to write about and seeing where those ideas mesh and where they don't quite mesh. So remember that when you make your value judgments here, your judgment calls, that you're doing it in relation to the ideas that you will be contributing to the essay. But let's go on. It'll make more sense in a moment. So here we have connect Garnes's ideas with a detailed, specific example from your own experience or observation. So this is where your ideas comes in, what I was just mentioning. So you're making a judgment call by taking Garnes' ideas, applying them to a specific example from your own experience or observation, and talking about your example in terms of Garnes' ideas. That's where the judgment call comes in. Where do things line up? What can you learn that you might not have known before about either Garnes's ideas or about your example? So here are some things to remember as you're making this connection between Garnes's ideas and your observation. Fully explain the ideas in the passage. Again, it's very important that you are writing for people who don't know what you're talking about. Use the key terms that you've identified from the passage to discuss your example. That's how we will know that your example is related to the passage, because you are picking up key terms and you are applying them to your explanation of your example. Also, don't forget, just like you want to explain the author's ideas fully, you want to explain your example fully. So fill in all of those dots for us. Don't leave us anything to guess. It's much better to over-explain than to under-explain. And also, don't get bogged down using too many examples from your own experience. Just choose one or maybe two examples and explain those examples in great detail rather than using a bunch of different examples that you really only treat superficially. And it's so important, it's here 3 times. Reminder, don't forget to use key terms to talk about your example. Don't forget to use key terms to talk about your example. Don't forget to use key terms to talk about your example. And then finally we have here, and also work with the passage's main points by using at least 2 specific quotations from it. That means you gotta quote twice. So, when you quote, think about following these 3 steps, the 3 I's, with every quotation that you choose. And if you want to jot any of this down so that you can refer to it as you're writing your essay, knock yourself out. Those 3 steps are introduce, integrate, and interpret. The first one, introducing. That means setting up the quotation for people who have never read the passage. Sound familiar? You're going to hear it again. You want to talk about what the writer is discussing leading up to the quotation that you've chosen. You want to make sure that you're defining words or ideas that people would need to know in order to make sense of the topic and to make sense of the passage. Not only is it important to define words or ideas that people might not know, but you need to define words in the context that they're used in the original reading. So, for example, the main key term that Garnes works with is literacy. And if you were just to go up to somebody on the street and say, "What is literacy?" that person would say, "Well, literacy is the ability to read and write." And of course, that isn't wrong, but Garnes is using the term literacy in a far more complex way, in a way that considers context, not just rote abilities. So that's something that you would need to explain to people, if this were the excerpt that you were using, which of course it is not. But this is something that you would need to explain to people in order for them to understand the ideas in the passage. So make sure you're defining things in the same way that they're used in the passage you're given, not just how they're defined in everyday usage. And again, I tell you here, pretend you are writing for people who have never read the passage. Pretend you are writing for people who have never read the passage. Pretend you are writing for people who have never read the passage. It cannot be said enough. Integrate. That's the second of these 3 steps. What you want to do, and what we mean by integrate, is that you want to put the quotation into a sentence of your own. So what we do not want is what we see in this first example here, where we just have a quotation mark. In addition to knowing how to work with written texts, it also includes understanding the beliefs, practices, and traditions of any particular cultural group, period, unquote. There are no words of my own in there. It's just the author's words, and we want to get some words of your own to set up the quotation. So here's a better way of going about it, where we use a signal phrase. It could be Garnes claims, Garnes explains, Garnes argues, anything like that. Garnes claims, comma, quote, in addition to knowing how to work with written texts, etc., etc., etc. So that's a better way of going about it. The most sophisticated way of going about it, though, is to not just use a signal phrase, but to use a combination of paraphrase and direct quotation. So that means some of what Garnes is talking about, I'm saying in my own words, and some of what Garnes is talking about, I'm using her own words. Here's an example. Though Garnes acknowledges that reading and writing are two important aspects of literacy, she argues, quote, it also includes understanding the beliefs, practices, and traditions of any particular cultural group. So that's integration. Remember, don't just leave a quotation hanging out there in a sentence of its own. And the third I is interpretation. Think about what the point of the quotation is. How can you explain it in your own words? Again, what the people who are reading these exams are looking for is your ability to take really complicated ideas and make sense of them without oversimplifying them. So make sure you're able to explain what you quote. You want to think about why the point is significant and how it is related to your example. Does the quotation make you look at your example in a new way? Or does your example shed new light on the ideas in the quotation? It's very, very important, though, that you don't try to skim over the challenging parts of the passage. In the one that we just read, there are parts of it that are much more complicated than others. Now, we want to see that you can deal with that complexity. Someday I'm sure you'll see me marching down the street with a sign that says this: reject simplicity, embrace complexity, because complexity is what we want to see you be able to account for. And then finally, part 4 of the prompt is going to be questions to think about. Now, there's no sense really reading through all of these questions because they're going to be different for every prompt, but there are some things to keep in mind. These questions are meant to help get the juices going. This is not meant to be a checklist. This is not an essay exam where you have to go answer each part. So don't worry about it like that. They're just to get you thinking. You can use all of them, some of them, or none of them. But it's very important that you don't let these questions to think about deter you from your primary tasks, which are analyzing and evaluating the passage, connecting the ideas in the passage to a personal example, using key terms to discuss your example, and working with at least 2 quotations. And what else, just as a reminder? You guessed it. Write as if you are writing for people who have no idea what you're talking about. Here's some things to remember. Read the prompt, read the prompt, read the prompt. You have plenty of time to do the writing that you need to do. Before you begin to read, take a deep breath, focus yourself, and read it word by word, sentence by sentence, idea by idea, fully. Because what's most important in this whole prompt is that excerpt. And if you don't have a good understanding of that excerpt, the essay is not going to turn out terribly well. Another reminder might sound familiar. Write as if your readers know nothing about your topic or the passage. Also, in order to help you, feel free to mark up your paper. And keep in mind, too, that length counts. That is not to say that a long essay will necessarily score better than a shorter essay, but your essay needs to be well developed, it should have more than one paragraph, and it should have some sense of organization. Here are some things to avoid. I've said it before. Don't oversimplify the ideas in the passage. If you take complicated ideas and distill them down to something very simplistic, that's going to tell us that you need a lot more help with reading. Another thing to avoid, don't write like an advice columnist. You want to explore these complex issues. You want to make observations about them. You're not trying to help people lead a happy life. You also don't want to make assertions like, what so-and-so says is true because, or this quote is important because. In high school, a lot of times we get accustomed to writing things like, I think this, and what I think is true because so-and-so said to. So-and-so said that so-and-so, so-and-so said that so-and-so was true. I hope you got that. But you don't want to think about using authors as proof like that. We want to see your ideas in the forefront. Thoughtful, well-developed ideas will speak for themselves. Don't make the same point over and over and over again. Every time you are inclined to do so, use it as an opportunity to be more specific. Make sure you're on the lookout for that. It's very dangerous. Repeating yourself. Okay, this doesn't happen very often, but it's happened enough that I feel I should bring it up. Don't discuss why you feel you should place into one class or another. People are paid to make that decision. Also, stay away from faith-based examples. This isn't to say that anyone's religious beliefs are good, bad, or otherwise. It's just that this is a touchy area, and you can't take people's beliefs for granted. So just stay away from faith-based examples in general. Try to avoid the second person, so don't say you. And if you can avoid saying you, this is also going to help you keep away from writing like an advice columnist. Don't use cliches or cliched examples. Avoid the obvious. If you look at the prompt and you think, oh, here's an idea, everyone will think of that, don't use that. Use something that not everyone would think about. And finally, and very importantly, don't use text speak. The letter I, when you're talking about yourself, it's capitalized. The word your, there are 3 different ways to spell that, but none of them are you are. So just be aware of that. You're undertaking a pretty formal task here. You're not texting your friends. And here, finally, are some do's. Of course, take the exam very seriously. Slow down, take a deep breath, take time to think. Use a variety of sentence structures. If you find that your sentences are all beginning in the same way, go back and show us that you can be more flexible with your sentence structures than what you're doing. Use the entire 60 minutes that you've been given. If you finish early, go back and reread the prompt, reread what you've written, tweak something here or there, but don't stop working until you've been told to stop working. Make sure, of course, that you stay on subject. We don't want you either to just summarize the ideas. Analysis is an important part of this, but that goes beyond summary. That means advancing an idea of your own. Strive for complexity, of course. Try to lead readers to conclusions that they might not have otherwise come to. And believe me, it actually happens. Sometimes we will be sitting around the table reading these exams and we'll say, "Hey everybody, stop for a second. Let me read you something that a student wrote." And it will really lead us to think in ways that we've never thought before. So this might seem like a sort of throwaway exam that you're only doing because someone is nearly holding a gun to your head and forcing you to do it, but it actually has the possibility to affect people's thinkings. So take it that seriously. And finally, proofread, proofread, proofread. Make sure that your grammar and your punctuation is as accurate as it possibly can be. And that, my friends, is the advice that I can give you to help you place to your potential. I wish you the very, very best of luck on your exam, and we will see you in class. Thanks very much.